Welcome to the channel. My name is Jacob Heffington, and I have social communication disorder. Hopefully this video will help explain to you what that means. A quick disclaimer. I'm not a mental health specialist, nor do I claim to be one. This video is not intended to serve as a source of diagnosis, but is for informational purposes only. If you feel that you have any concerns, you should consult a mental health specialist and/or your personal healthcare provider. Today's topic is going to be, what is social communication disorder? Social communication disorder was first put out in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, by the American Psychiatric Association in 2013. Today we are going to discuss the diagnostic criteria put out by the manual, as well as I'm going to discuss a few personal examples from my own life about the disorder. The first thing we're going to talk about is Section A. Section A is divided into 4 parts, which are labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4 by number. Section A is persistent difficulties in social use of verbal and nonverbal communication as manifested by all of the following. Subsection 1, deficits in using communication for social purposes, such as grading and sharing information in a manner that is appropriate for social context. What this means is that in life, different social contexts will have different ways of will require different ways of communicating, such as working on a school project versus communicating or participating in a class discussion. Each of these has appropriate mannerisms and actions that need to be taken, such as raising your hand would be appropriate in a class discussion, but not so much in a project discussion or in a romantic situation as depicted in this image here. The second requirement of Section A is impairment in the ability to change communication to match context or the needs of the listener, such as speaking differently in a classroom than on a playground, talking differently to a child than to an adult, and avoiding use of overly formal language. Each of these is a very important detail, and there's some good examples here. That a child or an adult with social communication disorder will have a hard time changing the way they speak to fit different social contexts, like we talked about in the first case, speaking differently in a classroom than on a playground. Someone with social communication disorder may not understand the differences in the social context and the social constructs that exist in each of those spaces. Subsection 3 is difficulties following the rules for conversation storytelling, such as taking turns in a conversation, rephrasing when misunderstood, and knowing how to use verbal and nonverbal signals to regulate interaction. The images here depict a negotiation, a conversation, and a proposal and questioning, all 3 of which have different rules of conversation and different rules of participation. Very important to those distinctive conversations, something a person with social communication disorder would not understand. Also depicted is going to be body language. Body language is very important for social communication disorder. It's one of the primary nonverbal signals that people with with social communication disorder, have to learn. They usually learn it in earlier ages where therapy is more targeted. Subsection 4 is difficulties understanding what is not explicitly stated. Uh, for example, making inferences and non-literal or ambiguous meaning of language. For example, idioms, humor, metaphors, anything like that, any type of figurative language. For example, window shopping. Someone with social communication disorder, if you just said window shopping to them and they hadn't had a context where they've understood it before, they're not going to understand that window shopping means you're not going to buy windows, you're going to look through windows and just browse. That's an example of this. Sections B and Section C are very convoluted and very it's wording, but it's a lot of the same things that we're talking about before. It's just the application of it. B is the deficits result in functional limitations in effective communication, social participation, social relationship, academic achievement, or occupational performance, individually or in combination. What that means is that for a person to have social communication disorder, those first four items have to have a result on some part of their everyday life, and it has to limit the functionality of the person in that aspect. For example, I find in a lot of my social interactions that my personal diagnosis for social communication disorder makes it very hard for me to function as a effective communicator at times in that, which is another specific target group they also talk about, but they kind of link together. You know, your social participation is going to hurt your social relationships. At least that's how it worked for me. Every case is, of course, different. I don't claim to be stating just complete fact here. Section C, though, is the onset of the symptoms is in the early developmental period, but deficits may not become fully manifest until social communication demands exceed limited capacities. What this is saying is that you'll usually see some sort of very basic form of this when they're young, usually more of that fourth symptom of not understanding literal context. But not all of those criteria will always be met at a young age. It'll be as they progress and as they get older, and more of those items are required that it'll manifest. For example, again, myself, I stopped counseling when I was leaving the 8th grade, and when I entered high school and was introduced into a lot of new social and complex social areas, I found a lot of new symptoms of social communication disorder that I hadn't noticed before because the social communication didn't need those limited capacities. And then finally, D, the most contentious point of a social communication disorder diagnosis is that social communication disorder, a lot of what we diagnose it with is also we are diagnosed with is very prevalent in autism spectrum disorder, Asperger's, dissociative identity disorder, and other disorders like that, which are all linked. And it's one reason why a lot of people find a lot of contention in social communication disorder being defined as its own thing, is that it's very similar to. But what D states is the symptoms are not attributable to another medical or neurological condition or to low abilities in the domains of word structure and grammar, and are not better explained by autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, intellectual developmental disorder, global developmental delay, or another mental disorder. It's very specific. What they look at for diagnosis is specifically what you don't have rather than what you do have. Can your symptoms be better explained by something else, or is it very specifically that you have these issues? If you very specifically have these issues, you more than likely have social communication disorder. If you have other symptoms, or if these are not your symptoms and your symptoms are something else, then you don't have social communication disorder, you have another mental disorder or condition. And yes, so that is a very brief overview of the diagnostic criteria for social communication disorder as put forth by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders by the APA from 2013. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about social communication disorder, and this helps you in whatever you're trying to find. Thank you. If you liked my video, please make sure to like and subscribe and follow me for more.